Hello and welcome to Weekly MTG. I'm your host, Blake Rasmussen. And as usual, after every BNR announcement, we come on the show and we talk about all the things that we just did. And so we're going to answer a bunch of your questions. We have a number locked and loaded right here from the internet. But I'm also going to be watching chat and answering questions. We're going to go format by format and just talk. We're going to talk about all the decisions that were made, the way that R&D is thinking about these different formats, and we'll spend an hour doing that. And to do that, we brought in two of the experts here.
Yeah, I am Jadine Klomparens. I am the play design lead, so I spend a lot of time thinking about Standard and happy to talk about it today.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Carmen Klomparens. I'm a senior game designer on the competitive play design team. I do a lot of work on the not rotating stuff in Magic, so that's the Pioneers, the Moderns, the Legacies, the Vintages of the world.
All right. So between the two of them, they know everything. So we got this covered.
Well,
more or less.
Yippee!
All right. We are going to start with the biggest one, the biggest news, Standard. And we're going to throw the graphic there. In case you didn't see it, we banned 3 cards here. We've got Vivi, Orienteer, Screaming Nemesis, and Prof's Eidetic Memory. So, if you want the full explanation, obviously you can go to the BNR announcement article that we posted yesterday on dailymtg.com. Why don't you give us a real quick rundown of why you took action with these 3 cards?
Absolutely. So first off, Vivi Orienteer. I think we all saw it coming. At this point, the deck the blue-red Vivi Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck had been dominating the tournament scene. It was played at a very high rate, converting to day 2s at higher rate than everything else. Incredible win rate. Very clear that we needed to take action. The format had devolved into, I'll say, like a 1.5 deck format where it kind of looked like Vivi was the only reasonable choice to play at a competitive level, and everything else was just worse. So our first priority here in this banned and restricted update was to break up the Vivi plus Agatha's Soul Cauldron combo. We chose to take action on Vivi. Mostly because we think it is the stronger overall card. In a world without Agatha's Soul Cauldron, we think Vivi would still see a lot of play in blue-red decks and be a strong card there and might elevate them higher than we were interested in them being at this time. Agatha's Soul Cauldron, it's been pointed out a lot, has some risk of going wrong in other combo ways. The card did exist in the format before Vivi for a couple of years with nothing going wrong. It takes a really specific interaction to make Agatha's Soul Cauldron a really strong card and not a really fun fringe combo card. So we're hoping it ends up back in that space.
I like your emphasis on the fun part there, right? Where I know there are some decks that people go, oh, this is fun. We saw some infinite mana combos at a previous Pro Tour that were kind of fringe and just proved out to be a novel thing that Standard can offer, whatever it's at the appropriate power level.
Right, exactly. Continuing on to Prof's Eidetic Memory. So this is another card from the blue-red deck that has kind of gained steam over the past few months here. We first saw this deck, the Prof's Eidetic Memory is kind of the core to the blue-red strategy, playing a bunch of creatures that cantrip or rummage or draw cards in some various fashion up the curve. Get huge sizing off Prof's Eidetic Memory, back it up with a couple of really efficient card draw spells, and you have a deck. So this is kind of an engine that many decks have ran, including the Jeskai Oculus deck from Pro Tour Aether Drift. It was awesome there. We were really happy with that deck. Over time, as we've kept adding more cantrip creatures and spells, Winter Night Stories and Quantum Riddler are the 2 most recent ones. We kind of believe that this deck was going to be too strong even without Vivi, that it would have too high a chance of being the strongest strategy, and we would be in the same place again with just playing against a lot of blue-red and not having a clear angle to attack the deck, as it's so hard to go bigger than Prof's Eidetic Memory. The creatures are so big, it's hard to deal with it. You're at an interactional disadvantage against the card. So we went ahead and banned it.
Right, and then a lot of times we kind of think the selection elements of the Is It deck are something that is pretty fun for players to get to do, that draw, discard sort of thing that you're talking about. But those are balanced against the fact that you aren't actually going up very much material whenever you play with them. The amount of material that this actually allowed you to gain from even just Winter Night Stories, this is one of the examples that you brought up, was just so far and above what felt appropriate for Standard.
Yeah. And then Screaming Nemesis, the mono red aggro deck, was the only deck that many people thought over the course of the past few months of Vivi's dominance that could hang with Vivi at all. Towards the end, it became pretty clear that it couldn't actually hang with Vivi. The win rate at competitive tournaments for mono red was quite low. The numbers look a good deal higher on the internal data that we look at with how games play out at large sample sizes. And we were pretty sure that if we didn't take action against mono red, it would be the de facto best deck going into the post-Vivi format, and that wouldn't be the best experience. The mono red deck really can, when it's too strong, hurt diversity in the format by saying, hey, a bunch of slow decks have no chance. You need to be able to respond quickly, and you need to get on the board early if you're going to play in this format, and that's not the experience that we are hoping for. Screaming Nemesis was the target for the ban as the card that makes it the hardest to attack the mono red deck when it's strong. We do want mono red to have a place in the format. It's great if it is among the best decks. It is not great if it is the absolute best deck. And with Screaming Nemesis out of the way, there's more room for green decks to play blockers and have that be meaningful against mono red, or for decks to incorporate some life gain as their strategy for beating mono red. So we took action there, and we hope that mono red will end up strong, but not too strong, and that you'll have places to go if you are worried about playing against that deck.
Yeah, speaking of green, I mean, I don't know about you two, but I've played a bit of Standard on Arena. Since the bans went into effect, there's a lot of green out there right now. A lot of Ouroboros and that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm a Tifa sicko myself, so that's one where every time Arena asks me if I had fun, I just want to go, I had a 512 power creature. Do you think I had fun? Yes, of course I did.
All right, I do want to get to some questions about the format. Now, this is no one specific question, but we're seeing a lot of various questions like, oh, what about this card? Why didn't you take this card out? Like, there were, I'll just list some of the cards that people have named for Standard that they're like, oh, why didn't you talk about Ouroboros, the Enduring Curiosity, Omniscience, Superior Spider-Man. Can you talk about how you framed other cards and other archetypes in this discussion?
Absolutely. I think the cornerstone of it is that we don't take banning cards lightly. We want Standard to be an environment where you expect to play with your cards and play with them for a good deal amount of time. We're at 3 years. You can play with this card that you got for a long time if it's not banned. And whenever something is crossing the line into a speculative ban, like there's a chance this goes wrong, should we ban it? The answer very often is going to be no. We're going to want to see that we actually need to take action. The threshold is pretty high. We have to be very confident that this is going to be something that will require action for us to do it preemptively. And none of the cards here cross that barrier, we think. There is a decent chance that they all find a place in the environment that is healthy and fun. I will say, in general, it is a razor-thin line between this card is too strong and warps the format and is at a level where it is among the best decks in the format. There have to be best decks in the format. We want a tier 1 of the format to have 3+ decks is really what we are hoping for, and that the gap between tier 1 and tier 2 isn't that wide. Those are the two main things we're looking at when deciding to take action. So to claim that Ouroboros or Omniscience is going to not just be a strong deck, but to be so much stronger than the rest of the environment that we hurt diversity is just a very hard thing to know, especially from evidence in a metagame that was so warped by Vivi. It's really hard for us to know, for anyone to know, what things are going to look like in the world after that. How many things were unable to be played because they couldn't compete with Vivi? What was kept on the sidelines and not showing up at all? A lot of hope that we're in a brand new world and that we're going to get to explore a lot of new stuff in Standard now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it ends up being really complicated where it is possible that any of those cards ends up being strong among the best cards in the format. Even in the world where one of them is problematically strong, it is hard to have the degree of confidence to know which of those targets is the one that could be the problem, which then kind of forces us to ask ourselves, okay, do we take action against every strong card in the environment, which is not the case, and obviously we don't want to do that, to Jadine's point about taking bans very seriously. So the degree of confidence that the metagame will shift in a specific direction that has Superior Spider-Man or Ouroborid or Enduring Curiosity, each of those are probably different versions of a Standard format, and it is very hard for us to know what the true direction that the format will end up going once we take 3 very strong cards out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, you articulated a lot of the tension really well, is that, we can see cards rise quickly to the top of the format, but for you all, banning is a serious cost. And if we as a company sometimes appear hesitant to pay that cost, it's because we want to be absolutely certain that it's a better world that we live in. To that end, I've seen a lot of questions about 3-year Standard and how that is affecting how you all approach both this announcement when we do it, as well as kind of testing for Standard and philosophy around it. Can you touch on that a bit?
Yeah, so I think the community, or at least my social media feeds, have a lot of pointing to kind of the bad parts of 3-year Standard, or the things that make things more difficult for us. Like, yes, the card pool is bigger. It makes testing FFL more challenging. FFL is our Future League, our testing process for Standard. It makes finding interactions like Vivi and Agatha's Soul Cauldron something that is a little bit searching like a needle in a haystack when you think of all of the cards that could go wrong and all of the cards that we have to look at for single card interactions. That is true. That is harder. There are also good things that are going on. We have way more information about the cards that are strong in the format that are currently legal in our Future League than ever before. In the old days of 2-year Standard, we would have like 1 set max be released in the real world, actually see how the cards play in the format we were testing. Nowadays, we have closer to a year of cards that we can look at and say, hey, here is our baseline. These are the cards that we know are the strongest from these sets. These are the cards that we can peg our new cards against. That gives us a lot more confidence in the power level of our cards, helps fight power creep because we are pegging the power level of new cards to old cards and saying these cards should play well together once we actually understand the power level that is going on. And that's all just from the design perspective. We believe that the player experience for 3-year Standard is so much better, that by being able to play your cards for longer, to not have to constantly keep up with cards rotating and needing to rebuild your Standard collection, that the local Standard scene can really come into its own and gain a lot of popularity. Tier 2 of Standard right now looks awesome. The card pool is incredible and diverse, and if you are not playing at the highest competitive level, there are so many cool things to do, and the format looks really fun. I have a lot of hope that once competitive format has looked bad recently, once we tone down Vivi, we might get into a very fun world of Standard. We're not that far off.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned there was the context point, which I do really want to drive home, and I'll share an anecdote on the points about how little information we used to work with. So I got hired at the end of 2020. Not, as the kind of humble brag, I had just done pretty well in the pro circuit. A lot of that was with the Omnath Adventures deck, which was very strong. I figured, I'm very tuned in, I'm very plugged in. I'm going to go into the Future League and tell them all the stuff I know. And I got there, and Zendikar Rising was the only set that was still legal. that was legal in the real world at
Yeah.
the time. It was extremely jarring to just go, oh yeah, no, it turns out actually all of the cards through Midnight Hunt are already locked down,
Yeah.
and we don't have a great idea. We kind of know what some of the strong ones were. Everyone was very high on Goldspan Dragon, for
Yeah.
example. But now we do have a point where we have about a year of sets where we can say, okay, great. These are the cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm that are very strong in the real world, and we should be playtesting with those cards in mind.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I want to branch off that are really interesting discussions. So the having a year worth of cards in the real world is relatively new for you. How long have you been living in that world?
A couple of years now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because with the Switch, we didn't quite know when it was happening.
End of
So-
23,
yeah. So about 2 years.
Okay. And then I also want to, you mentioned it's sort of inside comments the difference between like tier 2 or like local level standard and versus competitive standard. And we've seen a lot of comments about, standard is dead, you've killed standard. I went to our play team and I asked for the data. We've kind of thrown out, no, standard's doing great in terms of attendance, but I wanted to grab the data, and I went ahead and grabbed it for other constructed formats as well, just so that we can all be talking about the same thing. So here we have data. We're just measuring everything post-pandemic because it doesn't make any sense to do it during the pandemic or pre-pandemic. It's just a completely different world. But so here's we're not going to give exact numbers, but trends. So for weekly standard tickets in store, so a ticket is somebody's playing in an event that is a ticket. That's our internal marker. So weekly standard play post-pandemic has roughly doubled. It goes up and down based on the week or specific events or where it is in the life cycle, but roughly the trend line has doubled. The peak was a week in July of 2025 with Final Fantasy, which is not terribly surprising. But the peaks for both Bloomborough and Edge of Eternities were pretty close, looking at the full week. If you look at the month that had the highest amount of standard play, not that long ago, was August 2025. So that's looking at the full ecosystem. Now, sticking with standard, where it has struggled in recent months is competitive play. RCQ tickets are down again, kind of in the last just like 2 months. The standard showdown play was down, and Spotlight Series attendance, again in this recent Vivi era was down. So it is that sort of competitive versus local dichotomy and working to ban for both. We don't want to take cards away from players at their local store, but if the competitive format is a mess, then we do see an impact. Now, I went through and I did the other formats as well, because we're going to talk about all of them. Pioneer play dropped significantly. We're going to talk about Pioneer in a little bit. Modern play has been relatively steady during that same period. If you look at all 60 card constructed formats combined, so that's including everything like Legacy and Vintage even, you put that all together, it's been relatively steady throughout that period. So we see Standard going up, Modern staying the same, Pioneer dipping, and it's all kind of evening out. For comparison, because I know we'll get asked, Commander tickets during that same period have roughly doubled. They outrank everything, but the trend line is roughly doubling. So we've seen some struggles in standard competitive play, but not standard play overall. And then we've seen some struggles in Pioneer as well. So we will talk about those. But, while we're on that, how do you all, when you're making these BNR announcements, I get to be a fly on the wall for these, which is great, but you all talk a lot about that local play versus competitive play balance. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we ultimately care about both a lot. It's important that the experience is fun at the local level, and it is really important that the competitive experience is diverse. We want that competitive experience to be something that when somebody who plays locally watches the Pro Tour, sees tournament results, they are inspired to play that deck, that they see something cool that they can replicate for themselves at their local FNM. And when the competitive scene is bad, over time, both the local and the competitive scene suffer. The competitive scene suffers first, and then as the local scene kind of gets the message that this format is stale, play starts dropping off. So we do care a lot about keeping competitive play healthy, and it is, I think, the focal point of most of our BNRs. Trying not to ban cards because they are the terror of the local scene, for instance. Trying to make sure that everything we are doing is for making sure the top of the metagame can end up healthy and balanced, and trusting that that will improve the quality of the overall ecosystem.
I do want to address a rumor that I've seen online and that I see in chat, because people are going to be like, I don't believe you.
Not a rumor.
So there is a rumor going around that stores list Commander events as standard to get their WPN status. First of all, there is no metric to get or maintain your WPN status that requires you to run standard. That is not a requirement to get WPN status. It used to be. Years ago, it was. And so that's probably where this started. It was a thing. It has not been for years. I think 2020 was when we got rid of that requirement. So I'm not saying stores aren't putting formats in as different formats. That could happen. But there is no incentive to do so. Listing a command, if you're running a commander event, listing it as standard does not get you WPN status. And you can look that up. That is, the WPN status requirements are all online. Okay, let's go back to standard. You talked a little bit about this with having sets currently out in the real world, but I thought this was an interesting question. A few years ago, there were only 8 to 9 sets, max and standard. That's been a while since that's true, but whereas soon there could be as many as 20. So fudging the numbers, like standard used to be smaller, it's bigger.
Yes.
We got 3 years. All right. More sets means more chances for cards and combinations to slip through the cracks. What are you all doing to make sure we don't always have another boogeyman that takes too long to get banned?
Well, first and foremost, next year we have more ban windows. So latching on to the takes too long to get banned part of that problem, we're going to have more opportunities and more chances to say this doesn't go on for 3 months, it only goes on for 2. Stuff like that, I think, is a noticeable improvement. As for how to design cards so that we don't have to ban anything, that is stuff we think about constantly. I'm not sure I have a great answer other than, hey, every time something goes wrong, we look at what happened and we ask ourselves, is there something systemic here that we can get better at? And we do get better all the time. We take reflecting on what has gone wrong very seriously and reflecting on what has gone right, and try and translate that into new practices, new processes, just a new way of thinking. The play design team is constantly improving. Really happy with everybody on the team, and I just think we are all getting better at this so quickly. It's a joy to work on. But besides that, I think it just takes a long time before what we do and what we improve impacts what is going on right now. Because anything we learn today, the first time you will see it is in about 2 years as it starts impacting cards.
Yeah, something that you touched on I believe it was in the article that Blake's alluded to a couple of times, is specifically the additional emphasis that we're placing on individual 2-card combos, even when it doesn't necessarily go infinite. Mm-hmm. I think there's a sort of temptation to go, oh, that sounds strong, that sounds like a cool engine, something like that, but actually trying to work harder to improve our process on what the acceptable bounds of sorts of 2-card interactions look like, even when they don't go infinite. We don't have concrete answers. This is all developing. This is all still stuff that we are working on, but that's at least one of the process updates that I know we are working harder on now than we were even 6 months ago.
Yeah, 3-year standard is just a large paradigm shift in terms of the number of cards, the power level of the format, the strength of individual interactions. A lot of the stuff like 2-card interactions is stuff that we're not really learning for the first time right now. A lot of this we did discover internally like a year ago. So it's not like it's going to be a full 2 years before you see it in action, but getting to see it play out and just constantly learning.
All right, I'm going to jump around a little bit. We could probably stick with standard and that for a while, but I want to make sure that we talk about other formats, and I want to make sure that we talk about the BNR cadence. So we are going to jump around a little bit. Sorry to producers in the back. We're gonna move to Legacy because that's where we're getting a lot more of the conversation right now. We made a pretty big philosophical change.
Sure.
Sort of. That's maybe overselling it, but a little bit of a philosophical change.
Sure.
So let's put up the Legacy graphic with Entomb and Nadu. Great. Nadu, I don't know that we need to spend a ton of time on. It's been banned in other formats. We'll talk about it a little bit. But I think when I'm talking about the philosophical change, Entomb has felt like one of those brainstorm-like cards that sticks around for the format, and we finally took action on it.
Yeah, so this is a situation where it is hard not to feel like we have really done our best to try and ban around this card for a long time. Something that is different about Entomb as opposed to something like Brainstorm is, or Ancient Tomb, or any of those sorts of cards are that they are very open-ended and they go in a lot of different decks and they prop up a lot of different strategies that are iconic in Legacy. Entomb generally props up a single kind of deck.
Yeah.
This is something that we also thought is sort of a hallmark of Legacy, something that people love. This is, I'll pull the curtain back a little bit. This was a decision that I think is the hardest call I've had to make in my time here, where I think we were pretty split. I think I turned in the final list of changes to the banned and restricted list like 4 days late or something, which is quite a bit of time on the scale that we operate. But in general, over the last 2.5 years or so, this has been the best deck by a fairly significant margin. It's been resilient to hate. It's been resilient to, I think, 3 or 4 bans now.
Yeah.
Us really, really trying to make it so there could be a version of Entomb Reanimator that was good for the 22nd year that it's existed in Legacy or something like that. And it kind of came a point where we took no action in our last banned and restricted list, and it feels like the community is pretty tired of this being the best deck.
Yeah.
And we reached a point where the sort of Entomb package that let the Reanimator deck straddle the line between being a fair deck with this sort of combo kill that it's always threatening was something that people were really tired of. We ran out of options really to keep banning around it, and so it felt time to show Entomb to the door.
Now, speaking of banning around it, I've seen a number of people ask, well, okay, you banned around it. Would you bring any of those cards back? Troll of Khazad-dûm gets mentioned a lot. Like, would you unban Troll now that Entomb's gone? Or have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. I think bans and unbans are separate conversations in a lot of cases. One of the fail states, I think, for this sort of ban, when it feels like the reason that this ban is the correct one to make, is that the Legacy community is largely tired of this being the best deck. And there is a risk whenever you start doing what we'll call horse trading.
Yeah.
We'll nerf it by banning this card and buff the deck by unbanning another card, is you can end up in a situation where that is still the best deck. And that sounds like a pretty tough fail case.
Yeah.
Where I think doing those sorts of things over time makes a lot of sense, but between this Entomb ban and this Nadu ban, I think we are going to see a somewhat sizable shakeup in Legacy over time. Just there's a sort of power vacuum being left by the top deck not really existing in that shape anymore.
Yeah.
I think we need a little bit more of an idea of how the format is actually going to look before we start looking at things like unbans. This is something we talked about a little bit earlier, where you have those sort of second-order repercussions of any large ban list change, where you have to be pretty confident to know that something will not go wrong, or if it does go wrong, how bad is it?
Yeah.
And I think the case where we ban Entomb unban troll, maybe there is a world where there is some other discard outlet that the deck doesn't have to pay a very high cost to play, can maybe lead to that still being the best deck. That sounds like a pretty upsetting outcome.
Yeah.
Especially whenever we are having to sort of pull out this card, or this sort of block from the bottom of the tower that is a pillar of the format and has existed and been so iconic for so long.
Yeah. All right, so the article spent a lot of time, because this card has been so iconic, the article spent a lot of focus on that. There are two cards that keep coming up as questions in Legacy. Since they weren't in the article, let's talk about them here. So the One Ring came up. We just recently saw an artifact-heavy deck do really well. Talk to us about your thoughts on the One Ring in Legacy.
Totally. So this is a card that I would not say there's any special protection for or anything like that, no pun intended. It is something that we definitely are willing to take action against, but I think there is a sort of flattening going on in a lot of the narrative where you see this colorless-esque Mystic Forge, Karn the Great Creator deck do really well at the first Eternal Weekend this year, after it also did well last year. And it is tempting to shorthand that to it has been strong the whole time. Which is not necessarily the case. Last year, we did end up banning Vexing Bauble as a result of the results at the various Eternal Weekends. That card, very strong, very understandable why it got banned. But then for about 9 months, we saw Eldrazi end up be the version of colorless decks that saw more play in the format, or that was what people wanted to do with Grim Monolith for the most part. Even after we banned Sowing Mycospawn. To be clear, you can look at Legacy Showcase challenges over the summer. This is something I actually did this morning to just sort of check my own work because, memory can be hard sometimes. But it looks like Tezzeret Cruel Captain is the main reason that this deck is starting to show up at the numbers that it is now, which is a fairly recent printing of a card. And in a lot of ways, this sort of dovetails into a lot of our conversations around it being hard to tell how the format is going to look whenever you topple or take the top of it away. It's not clear to me that we aren't going to see some Delver variant that is really good at punishing Ancient Tomb on the back of Wasteland and the like, that makes it where this sort of ban is not necessary. But in the world where the One Ring does continue to dominate, if we see this colorless deck end up being very strong in both of the upcoming Eternal Weekends and see a bunch of online play, very, very reasonable for us to want to go after it.
All right. And then the second card people asked about for Legacy is Tamiyo.
Sure. So this is a card that is very similar to the One Ring in that there isn't any sort of special protection or anything like that for the card. It was printed a very long time ago, and in a lot of ways it took a while to be adopted into a lot of these sort of fairer blue shells. And I think I'm pretty interested in seeing how the format adopts again once we have taken out the top of it. I know Tamiyo is one of the cards that people pointed to as a reason that Reanimator could play this sort of half-on, half-off fair plan. In a lot of ways, I suspect that that was closer to a detail, and it happened to be the strongest card that could fill that role. But there are other decks that are playing Tamiyo and look pretty fun. And like what Legacy kind of wants to be about, asking the question, do I want this more aggressive blue-red Delver deck that's about applying pressure, or this Dimir Tempo deck that's trying to use Tamiyo to put a Kaito into play and accrue cards over time. So this is something that it would not surprise me if we end up seeing that Tamiyo is too strong for Legacy. I know the Brainstorm interaction in particular is pretty frustrating whenever it gets you. But at least for now, this is a spot where we are doing something that I perceive as a pretty large shift to Legacy. And I think an Eternal format like this really needs somewhere to feel stable a little bit. I don't think you want to just take the whole format out at the ankles, so to speak. And I'm a little bit worried once you start pulling out, all right, the best deck is gone, the strongest green card is gone, let's take out the strongest blue card, let's take out the best card to play with Ancient Tomb. It really starts to beg the question of what you are left with, especially with a couple of events on the horizon.
Other side of this, and you touched on it a little bit, but how much of a goal is it to have cards unbanned in Legacy? At the risk of breaking the format, there are a lot of fun classics we could play with. Mana Drain, Frantic Search, and Top, of course.
I think they're great. There's not, this is when I tried to think of the fun, clever thing to say there. I can say that I I was a long advocate for getting Mind's Desire unbanned before that ended up happening. I think it's a lot of fun whenever it does happen. In a lot of ways, whenever we do something like that, I generally am of the belief that it is more fun when the unban is the star of the unban or the BNR change itself.
Yeah.
So in a case like the current one, a lot of what is going to be going on is exploring, great, what is the strongest thing to do now that Reanimator is gone?
Yeah.
So we're going to see players kind of maybe prioritizing things that just look flatly the strongest, maybe sort of more in the generic rate space or the known players in the format. And whenever if we were to unban something like Mana Drain, Frantic Search, etc., or I think Deathrite Shaman is something that's come up a lot online.
Yeah.
I know people have joked about it around the office, but whenever one of those does get unbanned, it is a lot more fun if the outcome of that banned and restricted list update is, wow, let's play a bunch of Deathrite Shaman decks, or wow, let's play a bunch of Frantic Search decks and just have a bunch of fun. So that's a spot where I'm extremely in favor of doing that sort of thing, with the caveat that I think that it is more fun for the format in general if it happens whenever cards aren't being removed at the same time.
Sure. All right, let's continue hopping around and let's hop back to Pioneer. We had one change in Pioneer. Hearthfire Hero is banned. Tiny little mouse. What did this little mouse do wrong?
Listen, we were joking before coming on the show that this is either the second or third weekly MTG where Hearthfire Hero was the splash screen, and I'm always on here for the banned and restricted list updates, so it was a little funny.
He's just a little guy until he's not.
Yeah, right, exactly. You see that fist? Anyway, all kidding aside, overall, Pioneer looks like it is in a predominantly good space. So this is a spot where there are a number of good decks that you can play. You can do a bunch of powerful stuff. There have been recent adaptations with cards that have come out just this year. We've seen a lot of Greasebane decks move towards a more Orzhov build instead of some of the 3-color stuff that we've seen in the past, which has been pretty cool. But one of the problems in the format, based on our data, is that Mono Red is the best deck by more than one would expect. And I know that there's some narrative online about zooming in too hard on best of one. I will mention that for a second and say that in Pioneer best of one, it is Mono Red had the highest win rate of any deck I've ever seen.
Okay.
And also had the population size of the second and third decks combined plus a couple of percentage points. So some of this is from a spot of this deck is way too strong. And also a lot of people are playing it because of how strong it is. But even when you look over to best of 3 data, you see that it is still the best deck, albeit by a smaller margin, but it is still favored against all but 2-ish decks, if memory serves correctly, and is just absolutely beating the heck out of everyone else. And something that Jadine spoke to in the standard portion that I think really rings true here, especially whenever there isn't a ton of competitive pressure on Pioneer, is that Mono Red is a good part to have on the metagame. It's a great metagame pressure. But whenever it is the best deck, it can make it feel a lot harder to brew or explore the space or play whatever your pet deck is whenever you play against something that is as good at pressing damage and is resistant to removal as early in the game as Hearthfire Hero can be. So in general, this was a ban that was more trying to address some frustrations that Pioneer players had and not absolutely take any decks out of the format, but just take it down a peg.
Yeah, makes sense. Couple things I want to linger on there. So one, so I am seeing the questions about like play formats for Pioneer and how do you revitalize play. That's a different department. These are the folks who try to make it fun to play, and then the amount and where you play a format, that is a different department. Now, I did talk to them because I have seen questions about when are we seeing the next RCQ format announcements. It looks like that's likely going to be around February. We don't have anything to announce today, but we are going to have more format announcements for RCQs likely around February. And we are seeing the questions about like, hey, Pioneer is dead. Unlike the standard conversation about standard being dead, Pioneer has, as I said, Pioneer play has gone down. It is something we've discussed internally. We don't have anything today, but it is something we're keeping an eye on it. I want to keep going so that we hit a couple other formats. Now, Modern had no changes, but can you give a quick overview of what you're seeing in the Modern format right now?
Yeah, totally. In a lot of ways, Modern looks great right now. It's one where I know there are some people who like to see more changes in our formats over time, either unbanning cards or banning cards. Both directions can be true, but right now Modern is experiencing a lot of competitive pressure and still looking pretty diverse. There's always going to be a best deck, but most of the best decks in Modern look like they're by a healthy amount. There are some things that we do have our eye on, but to catch people up a little bit, we had a Pro Tour for Edge of Eternities just a month or two ago, if memory serves. Time is an illusion and all that.
Yeah.
But it had 7 different decks in top 8, with Tameshi Belcher is what ended up taking it down, and was the only repeat deck in the top 8, despite having a fairly modest win rate in the whole tournament itself. This sort of Esper Goryo's Vengeance deck was the biggest deck in that field. But both of those decks have fallen off a bit as we have moved to the regional championship season that we're experiencing right now. And in those regional championships, there's also a breakout deck in this Jeskai Blink deck with Quantum Riddler and a bunch of really cool stuff in that space. You're seeing Philia blinking it. You're seeing some of the Ragavan and Flage stuff that Boros Energy loves to do in that deck. And it's doing pretty well so far. We do have our eye on it, and it looks like a lot of fun and what we would like Modern to be about for the most part. Something that that we have noticed as well is that Amulet Titan is causing some light logistical issues based on how long it can take to actually execute a combo turn, where you sort of run into the second sunrise problem that we saw a decade ago, my hip, where despite time being called, if a turn takes 15 minutes, you're going to have things going half an hour over time, even though in tournament Magic just isn't equipped to handle that sort of thing. So it is not clear to us that the metagame can't adapt to something like Amulet Titan. Modern is a format with a ton of very strong but very pointed hate cards, which can cause churn that we like to see week over week. But if we do see that Amulet Titan is something that looks like it is going to continue to maybe be the best deck at the upper echelons of competitive play, and is going to add 50-60% to every single round time, we are probably going to look to take some sort of action that addresses the infinite combo that the deck has available to it.
Okay. I want to make sure that we spend enough time at the end talking about ban windows, because that was some of the other big news coming out of this announcement. But real quick in Modern, the main questions I've seen are, when things are generally good and stable, that's when people ask for unbans. So is there anything on your radar that, or did you all discuss unbans for Modern?
Yeah, this is one where we don't really want to change up too much, especially when regional championships are going on right now. And it feels like the format is not, it is healthy, but I would not categorize it as stable just yet.
Okay.
We just had a new breakout deck come out recently. Edge of Eternities did a lot to impact the format. We're seeing this Is It Affinity deck is doing quite strong at the moment. It took Mox Opal a little bit to do something fairer than Underworld Breach in Modern. But we're seeing the likes of Pinnacle Emissary, Kappa Cannoneer actually just attack people down in a way that we think is a hallmark of original Modern, which we really appreciate. But between all of the new decks that are hitting the format, things changing week over week, I don't think this is the right time to do something like that. But if it's these same decks that are kind of going in the circle of rock, paper, scissors, which we do like to see, but albeit if it is the same decks and it feels stale, that's the point where we're really going to be seriously considering unbans to give people new content.
All right. Okay, so now I want to talk about the ban windows, because some of the frustrations players had with the standard changes was that we didn't have a ban window in the middle of there. Now, our philosophy was that we were trying to stay out of the middle of RCQ seasons. We are mostly doing away with that. I'll call the new philosophy creating windows but still keeping an eye on that stuff. That's a catchy title. Let's throw so in the article we put a tentative schedule. So this is subject to change, but this is what we're targeting for BNR dates in 2026. You'll notice that December one is TBD. Those other ones, again, they could be moved as we see how this goes. But we've also never announced. We've always announced like what the next one is. We've never shown this out. So 7. How are you all thinking about having 7 dates?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the biggest problem with this last standard format in Vivi was that it was too bad for too long. So I'm really optimistic that having more windows, I think the longest gap between any of those windows is about 2 months. So that's not that much time for a deck to become too strong to the point where we wouldn't have seen it at the last window, and then stay too strong and make the format really unfun before we have an opportunity to ban it. So very optimistic that is going to do a large part to address that, at least from standards perspective.
No, I think you really summed it up well. In a lot of ways, part of why in Eternal formats, I'll say we lean towards a lighter hand is it is so much more satisfying from both sides of this conversation, both game designer hat on and player hat on, as someone who you can scroll my social medias. I play a ton of Legacy, for example. It is more satisfying from both sides for format issues to be addressed on the player side by solving a problem.
Yeah.
Either coming up with a new game plan, finding a new sideboard card, switching decks, whatever the answer to that is. I think Oops All Spells is a great example of this in Legacy, where I think there was a reasonable amount of people that were upset in the short term about, hey, we don't think this is very fun, and it looks like it'll be a long time before you can take action against something like this. We now have the ability to kind of actually wait and see, and then take the third step of act accordingly.
Yeah.
Where previously things felt, I think, a lot more committal on the long term with fewer dates.
Sure.
So here I do really appreciate that we can earnestly say, hey, it would be so much better if formats were able to ebb and flow and cards change over time, because every deck is someone's favorite.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that it is better for decks to get to exist than us have to ban them. We take this very seriously and don't like doing that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I'll take a second to re-articulate the standard banned list philosophy. We have 7 windows next year. We don't want to use all 7 windows. In fact, I would love it if we only made changes once or twice next year. Not that we're not going to take action if we need to, but that the ideal here is that we have the option available to take action when the format is bad, and that most of the time these windows pass by without making a change. So we have kind of 2 tiers of windows in standard, where every window we will take action if the format is past our line for too bad. It is hard to articulate that line. My best approximation is that if it is a 1 deck or a 2 deck format, 1 deck we almost certainly will take action, 2 deck we will look at it, and we also pay attention to how big the gap is between tier 1 and tier 2 decks. If that gap is wide, we are more likely to take action. So every ban window, if we have a format completely dominated by 1 deck, like the last few months with Vivi or Corey Steel Cutter Blue Red before that, we will take action and address that problem. Once a year, in our pre-rotation window, we will say, hey, let's take a format that is only okay right now and see if there is a way to make it great. That is our more, let's improve things that aren't clearly past our window for bans, and try and create something great instead of just trying to keep things stable. So we haven't said which window that will be yet. We will as it gets closer, but there will be that point next year as well.
So I'm gonna read this specific question, but then let's talk about it philosophically, because it's not, because overall, God, there it is. Okay, the new scheduled date is 5 days before the standard South American Regional Championship. Is there any chance that the standard format changes from this announcement will be disregarded for this RC? So that's not the only announcement date that butts up again some sort of competitive event. So how much is that taken into consideration when you all are making the decisions?
Somewhat. We think about the upcoming tournaments, and it may move the bar to action if it's particularly disruptive to an important event, plus or minus a little bit. This year, we mostly ran the experiment of, hey, what happens if we plan our ban windows and have few enough of them that they are just not going to be disruptive to tournaments? That experiment went poorly. And now we are here adding more windows. So yes, there is a chance that we make changes on these dates. We will be respectful of tournaments when we can, but it is important for the overall health of the ecosystem that we have the ability to make a change.
I'm seeing the same suggestion in this space over and over again. Why not just have a static ban day at the first Monday of each month? Because the same thing's not happening the first Monday of each month. Having a ban window like in the middle of a preview season doesn't make a ton of sense because there's new cards coming out. Having it the first Monday when the Pro Tour is on Friday doesn't make a ton of sense because we're messing with the Pro Tour or we can't affect the Pro Tour. So that's kind of how we landed. We looked at our calendar. Like these 7 dates are the result of looking at set release dates, preview dates, tournament dates, when the Pro Tour is, and kind of finding the most least. It's a lot of calculus.
There was so much calendar.
There was red string on a board, and
yeah, right. This is the thing where it was last week. I just had the meeting scheduled with like you, Billy Jensen, Jadine, Andrew Brown, like a ton of people. Where it was just okay. Let's look at all of our calendars.
Yeah.
This is horrifying.
Yep, it's a lot. Let's see. So I want to stick with, let's see. I think that covers most of that. I want to cover a few general let's see. So do we know when the next BNR announcement will be? Yes, it will be February 9th. That one's pretty locked in. Something would have to be drastic. The next one is usually going to be pretty solid. We'll confirm the next one with each BNR announcement. That was the other question. So, in these spaces where there is a competitive tournament, that is butting right up against one of these windows, how do you all feel about saying, okay, we're making this change, it won't affect the tournament this weekend? Is that something you're prefer avoiding? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, I think ultimately this is more a question for the play team. It has been something we discussed. It is a theoretical tool, but I'm not completely sure what constraints that they are placing on it.
Yep.
Yeah, I would trust other teams' judgment on this because they are people who are great at understanding the realities of playing an event, and most of what we are optimizing for, as you've spoken to before, is making sure that the games are fun. It's something that we do have at the front of our mind whenever we are making these decisions. What is the experience of playing Magic like? And we do care about that quite a bit. But we have seen a number. You've spoke to attendance at some of our spotlights, for example, where we love to care a ton about stability, but having people be positive that it will be a format they don't like is not an outcome that we want either.
Yeah.
So saying it depends is not a very satisfying answer, but it depends.
Yeah. Yep.
But also, like, the tactic of saying this doesn't affect that tournament aside, the experience of, I have a tournament, it is a week after the banned and restricted list update is scheduled, and I am nervous about my tournament, is an experience we care about a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of all of our philosophy is around making banned and restricted list updates predictable. So if you are worried about your tournament and you know it is there, we are hoping that we ban in a way where it is obvious to you if something is going to change or not. When it comes to standard, you can look at the format and say, hey, is this really dominated by one deck? If so, yes, there's probably going to be an update. Is it a healthy rock, paper, scissors kind of metagame at the top? No, you're probably going to be okay. Almost certainly. We are not trying to disrupt formats for the sake of it. So if you think the format you are playing is severely unhealthy, you can start thinking about the next world. If you think it's pretty healthy, you're going to be fine for your tournament.
And honestly, I think the best distillation of it is something that you just said, whereas we're not trying to disrupt formats for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that answers a lot of questions around unbans or around the cadence at which we ban and the like, where we take this really seriously, and a lot of times it is, why are we banning? Why would we unban? And it is not just cause.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. All right. We're just about out of time. I want to throw this bone out here because you know what, they've been asking and patient. Goblins is an iconic legacy deck that has become completely unplayable. Have you considered unbanning Goblin Recruiter to try to bring goblins back?
I think Goblin Recruiter is probably not one that we would want to unban for some tournament logistic reasons of it taking a very long time to resolve.
Yeah.
It also is not a very fun digital experience.
Yep.
As someone who truly, truly loves goblins, I have a Pro Tour 9th with it, or a Mythic Championship 9th on Breaker.
Yep.
Whatever. I love goblins. I don't think that is the best way to try and make goblins tier 1 again.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, is that legal in Canlander? Is that why you're asking?
I'm not asking.
Oh,
It was
of course
in chat.
it is. Okay.
It was in chat.
Okay.
Like I would play goblins in Canlander, please.
We're
that's
being
not my vibe.
elitist about it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We're just out of time, so we're going to call it there. Thank you for the fantastic discussion. We do have an official Discord that we are always taking more discussion in. Feel free to head over to that and share more thoughts on the BNR announcement and the change to the announcement cadence. We're going to be watching. We're going to be listening. It's all good data for us. It's all really interesting, and it all helps us make better decisions in the future. In the meantime, next week we will be back. We will be opening Avatar: The Last Airbender product. We're doing it a week later this time because of this announcement. But this week, if you haven't already signed up, is pre-release weekend for Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's looking like a sweet set. So definitely check with your local game store to make sure that you can reserve your spot this weekend or whenever the event is. And then we'll be back next week to open up a bunch of product and just talk about how cool the set is. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.